In this episode, we're going to talk about one of the biggest questions people have after taking multiple DNA tests. Why do companies like AncestryDNA and 23andMe sometimes give completely different ethnicity results? This confuses a lot of people, especially when one test says something like Scottish or Germanic Europe, while another test barely mentions it at all. The important thing to understand is that these differences are normal, and they do not necessarily mean that one company is wrong. Today, we're going to break down why this happens and how ethnicity estimates actually work behind the scenes. One of the most common experiences in genetic genealogy is taking multiple DNA tests and getting different ethnicity results from each company. For example, AncestryDNA may estimate a certain percentage of Scottish ancestry, while 23andMe may emphasize British and Irish instead. Some people even see entire regions appear or disappear depending on the company. This can feel frustrating at first, especially for beginners who expect DNA testing to provide exact answers. But ethnicity estimates are not reading your family tree directly from your DNA. Instead, these companies are comparing your DNA to modern populations and making statistical estimates about where your ancestry most likely came from. Your DNA test is not identifying nationalities in a strict or perfect way. Instead, companies compare your DNA to groups of people whose families have historically lived in certain regions. Then they estimate where your DNA most closely aligns statistically. Think of it almost like pattern recognition. Different companies build their systems differently, and they each use unique datasets and mathematical models. That means two companies can analyze the exact same DNA and still interpret portions of it differently. This is especially common in areas where populations have mixed for centuries. Reference populations are one of the biggest reasons ethnicity estimates vary between companies. A reference population is made up of people whose families have lived in a region for many generations. DNA companies use those groups as comparison tools, but every company builds its own reference panel differently. One company may have a stronger sample population from Ireland, while another may have stronger sampling from Eastern Europe or Scandinavia. Some populations are also genetically very similar to neighboring populations, which makes them harder to separate cleanly. So the quality and size of the reference population directly impacts the estimate you receive. One of the most important things to understand is that DNA does not follow modern political borders. Human populations moved, migrated, traded, intermarried, and mixed throughout history. As a result, neighboring populations often share a great deal of DNA similarity. For example, Scottish and Irish populations overlap heavily genetically. The same is true for England and northwestern Europe, or France and Germany. So one company may label a segment of DNA as Scottish, while another interprets that same DNA as Irish or northwestern European. Neither company is necessarily incorrect. They are simply interpreting overlapping genetic signals differently. Another major factor is the algorithms themselves. Every DNA testing company has its own proprietary system for analyzing DNA. These algorithms calculate probabilities and compare your DNA against large databases of reference populations. Even small differences in how the math is handled can create noticeable differences in ethnicity percentages. This becomes even more complicated in populations with deep historical mixing or migration. In many cases, ethnicity estimates are best understood as educated scientific approximations rather than absolute measurements. Many people are surprised when their ethnicity estimates change after an update. This is completely normal. Your DNA itself has not changed, but the company's understanding of population genetics continues to improve. As databases grow larger and more diverse, companies are able to refine regions and improve their models. This can cause percentages to shift dramatically from one update to another. Sometimes entire regions appear or disappear. In many ways, these updates represent the science becoming more refined over time. One of the most useful features in modern DNA testing is genetic communities. Unlike broad ethnicity regions, communities identify groups of people who share more recent historical and genetic connections. These communities often reflect migration patterns, geographic isolation, and clusters of related DNA matches. For example, you may receive a community connected to Appalachia, Acadians, Colonial Americans, or Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. These communities are frequently more helpful for genealogy research than ethnicity percentages alone because they point toward real historical populations and migration events. Small ethnicity percentages should always be interpreted cautiously. Tiny percentages can fluctuate significantly between companies and updates. A 1 or 2% result may reflect ancient shared ancestry, overlapping populations, or even statistical uncertainty. Sometimes these small percentages disappear completely during future updates. This does not necessarily mean the estimate was false. It may simply mean the company refined its interpretation of the DNA signal. That is why it is important not to build major conclusions solely around tiny ethnicity percentages. Ethnicity estimates are best viewed as one tool within a much larger genealogy toolkit. They can provide clues and context, but they should not replace traditional research. Family trees, historical documents, DNA matches, and chromosome analysis all work together to create a fuller picture of ancestry. The most successful genetic genealogy research combines DNA evidence with traditional documentary evidence. Ethnicity estimates can support research, but they are rarely definitive proof on their own. At the end of the day, it is completely normal for AncestryDNA and 23andMe to produce different ethnicity estimates. They are using different tools, different databases, different reference populations, and different methods of interpretation. That does not mean one company is correct and the other is incorrect. These tests are constantly evolving as population genetics continues to improve. The key is understanding what ethnicity estimates actually are and using them appropriately within your overall genealogy research. I hope this helped explain why DNA testing companies can sometimes interpret your ancestry in different ways and why those differences are completely normal within genetic genealogy. In future episodes, we'll continue exploring how these ancestry reports work, why results change over time, and how to better understand your DNA results overall. If you enjoyed this presentation, please follow, subscribe, and share.